Welcome to the Ranch Workforce Project, a limited series collaboration between the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program, a project to address the domestic labor shortage on farms and ranches, a project to replenish the pipeline, a project to attract new people into an old industry, a project to face what has to change from within. Because the future of agriculture doesn't just depend on land and livestock, it depends on people. And now, your host, Haylie Shipp.
Welcome back to the Ranch Workforce Project. I am your host, Haylie Shipp, joined again today with our co-host, Rachel Frost, who of course is the lead for the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program there at Montana State University. With us today, we've got a couple of guests, and we're really looking to this conversation to fix all of our woes when it comes to burnout. So I think any of us, whether we're in agriculture, we're in corporate America, we're parents, we're friends, we're in relationships, burnout is real in so many aspects of life. We're going to look at it from the ranching perspective today, but hopefully there's going to be some carryover in that as well. So JD Hill is joining us. JD, you are the livestock foreman for the Padlock Ranch, and then Caroline Wild with Wild Ranch Solutions. While we get started here, why don't we just go ahead and have each of you introduce yourself to the audience? And so kind of who you are, where you hail from, and what you do in your position. JD, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my name's JD Hill. I'm the operations manager at Padlock Ranch. I have the ever evolving job title because I'm kind of the catch-all for a lot of different things. You know, I've been with Padlock about 16 years. Worked up through our system, started as a cowboy, worked up through our system as a unit manager, and then moved into this role as operations manager when our CEO stepped up into his current role as CEO. Prior to that, I trained horses for the public for about 11 years, had a big stint of self-employment out there in Eastern Idaho, had a lot of Montana customers. And anyway, so I've kind of had an interesting career, I guess.
JD, for folks that maybe are from ranches that have a smaller profile, operations manager, what's under that umbrella? Is it basically anything that nobody else wants to do, or what is the the work that goes into your world?
So I'll explain our layout a little bit. So we're an integrated cow-calf feedlot and farm. So we've got 5 different outside ranch units, and then our feedlot, you know, and then farm kind of contributes into, you know, providing feed for those. You know, we have about 11,300 mother cows that we'll go to grass with, and we background all of our own ranch calves in the feedlot. So you know, I oversee 6 different ranch unit managers, and then I'm also do a lot of land stuff. You know, I'm probably the cheapest lawyer / paralegal in Sheridan County. Just over time, I've kind of picked up a lot of that stuff for the company just because it's kind of an area that I seem to have a knack for. So.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us. Caroline, you are also in a similar geographic area, it sounds like, to JD. You are self-employed. You have your own business called Wild Ranch Solutions. So give us a little bit more of your background.
I am. I'm also in Sheridan County, Wyoming, and I am self-employed and have been for about the last 2 years. I am a financial consultant and educator for ranchers, is what I tell people. My job title is also ever evolving because I don't have one, and so I do it all, except for marketing. I don't do that. I actually was born and raised in Maine, and so I came out to Montana State University to get my undergraduate in ranch management longer ago than I'm willing to admit. And so that's how I got out west and really fell in love with the agriculture industry and also the people out here. And so I worked in and around central Montana on every type of operation and ag job, it seems like, and then got burned out and decided to go to my master's program. And so I attended the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management, got my master's in ranch management, and that is how I got to where I am today.
Rachel, you are our producer. You didn't know you had this title, but you are the producer for the Ranch Stewards podcast. You're the one that puts all of these interviews together. So you know the people. I just get to be the person that turns the mics on. Why JD and Caroline for this interview today?
Well, that's a great question, Haylie. Evidently, we're all deciding that we have multiple titles and learning new titles that we didn't even know we had right now. So, as your producer, I'm happy to tell you why I chose JD and Caroline. And part of that is because you can tell from their backgrounds that they're bringing a wide variety of experience to this discussion. And those experiences are not just in years and miles, but they're also in the lenses that they're looking through the situation that, coming new to ag, being deeply vested in an ag community for the majority of their life. And if you're watching this on the visual platform of it, you could see that maybe JD's whiskers give a little bit of an indication there could even be some age difference that could influence how they're looking at this issue of burnout. So, two very highly qualified individuals that are coming from this with a wealth of experience, different lenses, and I think they are both going to be able to walk us down that road between how do we manage employee fulfillment while also maintaining efficiency of production on ranches.
JD, on the last episode, I kept on unintentionally calling Rachel old. And so now she's just going to pass that baton right on over to you right at the start here today. But this topic of burnout, we're going to look at it through the lens of being an employer as well as from being an employee. And so, JD, I want to go to it first with you kind of from that employer standpoint and why burnout is something you need to look at in terms of efficiency. I guess we just want to frame why this is an issue that, it's emotional, it's touchy-feely, it's all of those words that we're sometimes uncomfortable with, but this also impacts the bottom line.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that, right? We're all running a business, and one of our single biggest costs is labor. So we're always getting that, we're always getting some pressure, right? Find some efficiency in our labor, and try to, like in our case, trying to run, as many cows per man as we think is feasible. Every ranch unit's a little bit different that way, as far as some are more complicated than others, require more people, have more moving pieces. Some are simpler, and you can have, bigger ratios of cows per man. But, you're always getting challenged on that, we all answer to somebody, right? I mean, in our situation, I answer to a CEO who answers to a board of directors, and we're held accountable for staying inside of budgets and things like that, all while trying not to burn up people. And, I take that charge pretty seriously, just because, I got to come all the way up through our company, really from a entry level cowboy, to the role I'm in today. And I saw a lot of turnover at different times, and sometimes that were people that maybe weren't a right fit for the company, but other times it was, gosh, yeah, maybe the load was a little too heavy for folks. And so I'm always trying to use my experience in that regard to try to understand where people are at and try to figure out, how I can help take the load off folks when they're starting to show some signs of maybe being on the edge of that burnout deal, but it's a razor's edge you're on all the time, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, we have that profit motive as a business. And so that labor costs are huge.
Caroline, you already expressed that you have witnessed in your lifetime a season of burnout that caused you to make some shifts. And so talk to us why burnout is an issue from an employee standpoint.
It's funny, Haylie. I didn't even plan that, but that is just part of my story, and it fit in with the podcast. But it's happened multiple times in my career. Ag is can be a pretty transient business. It's hard to sometimes find full-time, year-round positions with the labor market that's available on some smaller ranches. And so I was hopping around a lot, and it kind of seemed like that was just what you did, right? And that was how you were in this industry. And I didn't really realize the toll it was taking on me until I counted up one year and realized I'd lived on 4 different ranches in 3 different counties. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. And so you get older too. Your 20s are kind of a time where you think you can do anything and go anywhere and put as many miles on your truck as you need to. Um, but once you start to look, for me at least, at what else I wanted in my life in terms of community and in terms of life outside of ranching, and trying to balance those things with the job and the career that I also loved and felt very deeply in continuing to be involved in, that's where I think the burnout kind of word came up in a way that made sense in my life.
And that's a great point too, Caroline. Like it probably wasn't what one specific employer was actually doing. It was the lifestyle that was causing the burnout and the seasonality of the employment.
That was definitely one thing. I think that every ranch is different. I've worked from 100 head operations to 10,000 head operations, and obviously one of the things about agriculture that I always tell people is you can't template it. Everyone's different. And so, however, I think there are seasons of busyness. There's calving, there's haying, there's irrigation season, there's, cows on summer grass season, there's calving, whatever it is. And sometimes you get on an operation where those come right back to back to back. And if you don't have time to kind of have the lulls of the season, I think sometimes we forget about we are kind of trying to work in tandem with nature, and nature takes a break too. And so we are also allowed to take a break.
I want to establish early on as well, because, I kind of mentioned like this is sort of a touchy-feely topic that sometimes in agriculture makes people a little uneasy, and it's fine. We just work 365, 24/7. It's part of what we do. It's what we sign up for. But I guess, Rachel, if you could kind of qualify for us that this is an important issue for us all to look at, and that it isn't a sign of weakness to be feeling under pressure in a situation such as this.
Absolutely. I do think that burnout is one of those words that's still not being used as much as it probably should be in ag. And maybe that's because we in ag, we're pretty tough. We think we are. We think we can handle almost anything that's thrown at us. And so we might even think that that word is overused in some situations and in other industries or scenarios. And so I think it is all about connotation. How do we think about things and how are we using that word? And to realize that burnout in ag might look different from burnout in more of or an urban industry or a technological industry or something like that. But it ultimately comes down to the same thing. It's ultimately fatigue. It's physical and it's mental fatigue because of a constant state of motion and going and doing. And that's just going to manifest itself in things that get back to that business model that JD was talking about too, of, a detachment. We're not paying as much attention to things as we should be. That's dangerous. So that's a personal danger in a field like ranching where not paying attention can cause you to get physically hurt, but it's also damaging to that bottom line. If we're not paying attention to those details, we're not noticing those animals that were sick quick enough, not paying attention to equipment that might be experiencing breakdowns or other issues, and all of that's going to be costing money to that business as well.
All right, so let's talk about we're again putting on our employer hat. How do we look at what's going on in front of us and recognize that we have an issue with burnout? And JD, I'm just going to kind of go to you with some of these employer questions, and then Caroline, I'm going to go to you with some of the employee questions. Please speak up, interrupt each other if you have anything to add. By all means, I don't mean to discredit anybody's thoughts that they have on one realm or the other. But JD, if you have this field of employees out there, Rachel kind of alluded to, they're maybe dissociating from things. What are some top red flags that you see that you're like, this is an issue that we have to address now?
I think it's when you start to notice that people aren't taking care of the details, right? I mean, just you start to see that maybe where balls are being dropped or just like little things are getting dropped, and I mean, that's one of my biggest jobs is to make sure, always be trying to monitor that, because at the end of the day, we have millions of dollars worth of cattle that are in our care. And guess what? Those cows didn't get to choose to be in this system. Right. So here we are, and so it takes everybody showing up every day, trying to be dedicated to do the tasks that are in front of them. I mean, at a basic level, right? A cow needs feed and water every day at bare minimum, and so, and then on beyond that, there's all the other things that just go into these operations. And so yeah, you're always trying to just check people's pulses, see where they're at, because sometimes when you see people start to maybe step back a little bit at work, or maybe you're noticing some of that, it's sometimes it's work related, but sometimes there's issues going on at home, right? Because we all have families and all these other externalities that are, that we're dealing with, that guess what, when there's problems there, those all manifest themselves at work too, and so it's trying to build a relationship with your people so that when you do see some of those signs, that you can go maybe have that heart to heart with somebody, and hopefully you're not bringing them in like in a real formal situation, but maybe it's out over the hood of a pickup somewhere, or while you're going and driving around looking at cows, seeing how things are going out on their particular unit, and just trying to, let people know that, hey, I care about you. We want to, want you to be part of our team. Is there something that's going on here that we can help with, because if it's work related, well, boy, then that's where I jump in and put my big hat on, and try to figure out, where I can intercede a little bit to help that person maybe get through a tough spot. And if it's a personal situation, well, maybe if they're comfortable, you try to be that sounding board or offer advice from your own situation, because it's ironic. Most of us have dealt with a lot of the same situations with our family working these ranch jobs. To some degree, it's a shame, but sometimes our families kind of get sad. Or point to that with my own family at different times where in order to do my job, I probably was putting my career first and my family second, and so that all comes to play, I think, for all of our employees as well. And so that you kind of hit it on a lot of different facets that way.
I think ranching, we sometimes forget when we're in it that it's a very unique industry, because oftentimes we live where we work too. And so it's a lot easier to, there's a lot of things going on in a person's mind. It's really hard to leave the job. There's not a lot of a commute sometimes. And so what JD said, personal stuff will sometimes show up at work just because the house is right there, the family's right there. And juggling those, sometimes there are things going on at home and there are things going on at work, and you don't have the capacity to deal with them both at both times. And the communication aspect I found to be really important. I think communicating is hard with anyone, and communicating is sometimes even harder with the people that you spend every day with, because you think they should just know what you're thinking because you spend 80 hours a week with them sometimes. But it's really great someone just to say, hey, you seem a little quiet. Hey, you seem like, this is your favorite time of year. You love branding and you're just, not having as much fun this year. Is something going on? Yeah, that can be really, really helpful.
I love those examples of conservation starter or conversation. I'm in the conservation world. I love those starters for conversations. I think so often we don't know what to say. And so much of this discussion can spill over into the mental health discussion too, where Caroline, the examples you just gave, and JD, like you alluded to, it might not have anything to do with work. It might be something personal that's really been eating at them. But JD, how do you get better as the employer at having these tough conversations? Is it just a muscle you got to work and work and work, and eventually it doesn't feel so hard to navigate?
Well, I have to admit, being around people and managing people wasn't the thing that drew me to this lifestyle, right?
You
And
don't say.
ironically enough, it's probably, I would say sometimes it's 60+% of my job, is navigating that, and so I think at the end of the day, first thing, you really have to take an interest in the people that are working on these ranches. I mean, you're going to have some folks that you build a personal relationship at a deeper level than you do others, but you have to have an interest in people. You have to want to see them succeed. I think there's a lot that goes into being real about what it's like to work at the ranch when you're in that interview process, I think that's one thing over time I've sure uh, I've challenged myself about, and I try to make sure that I'm not overselling what it's like to be a part of one of these large operations because, as Carolyn alluded to, uh, so I think smaller ranches have more like seasons with lulls in between. I like to say about this place, we just go from one busy to the next busy, and so it either fits your personality or it doesn't, and it's not a knock on somebody if that doesn't fit you. Some of that is that you're trying to divine, both parties when you're looking at these jobs is like, am I a right fit for that operation just because of the tempo and things like that, and same thing, does this job fit me and my family's goals and my personal goals, that I have outside of work? Because like say you're not a very well-rounded person if you don't have some of those other things going on out to the side, like if you're all work all the time, you're not going to last very long in any of these roles. Uh, so yeah, taking a deep interest in people at a personal level, I think is a big part of it.
Caroline, on the flip side of the coin, as an employee who has felt burnout, how do you deliver that message to an employer in a language that they're going to hear that doesn't sound like you whining about having to work too much?
Well, Haylie, I wish I had an answer for you. I'm gonna be real honest. I don't. It's hard. Um, yeah. I can only hope that as I continue in my journey in life and in agriculture that I get better about communicating these things. But it's really hard. It's a very we have like you said, the mental health conversation and the burnout question are like intricately related, and some of that tabooness I think crosses over. But yeah, trying to figure out what you want from life and your job and your life outside of your job, like JD said, I think is really important. And sometimes that means a change in your job circumstances just because they don't work anymore.
I'm thinking I just had a doctor's appointment. They always go through the mental health screening questions when you sit down in the doctor's office. Maybe we need to create a burnout questionnaire that you check in once a month and you just anonymously put in your survey, and then you can feel the pulse of what's going on across the board without it being linked to one employee. But um, Rachel, for the students that you work with, and I always thought Rachel's students were just like, typical college 18 to 24 or something, but she now has let me know that she's got students into their 30s that are alternatives. So it's not just that young demographic. But as you're going through the education pieces, getting them ready for ranch management, how do you discuss this topic with them?
Yeah, sometimes we stray away from what might be seen as the academic norms, but I think this is a very unique program and it is designed to produce unique individuals that have a unique job at the at the risk of overusing that word. Because like Carolyn said, you can't template it. So I manage a lot of expectations, but we also have some really real discussions. For example, I had a student in my office this morning and he is engaged and he was talking about when I go to look for a ranch, what do I need to prioritize? How do I understand what is the right fit for me? And I said, well, you need to sit down with your fiance and you need to have a conversation about what is non-negotiable at this time. What type of housing, what distance from her work and her professional goals, and who's going to be willing to take a front seat and a back seat at different times in your life potentially. And how are you going to work that out so that you're communicating and you're being fair about that? And so it's really just helping them understand themselves and what they're really wanting while also being really realistic about the demands of these jobs. And I don't want to understate the point that Caroline brought up, and that is that on a ranch, you are also living with who you work with. And that can be an adjustment for some of these students because they're able to kind of compartmentalize, even in the education side where they might be going out after class with their buddies and then seeing them at class, but still there can be a pretty good separation. And so helping them understand that that can be a challenge that you're living with who you're working with, oftentimes, most of the time, or really in close proximity to them. and then being sure that you understand what you really want out of this position and that you're also communicating with your significant other about what their expectations are. It goes back to the conversation we had with Trey about how important it is when you're selecting that new hire that it works for them and their family as well. So, not necessarily built into the curriculum, more so just built into the experiences and the conversations that we're trying to have in this unique program to really help those students understand that there's a lot more that goes into this as a job and a career choice.
So Rachel and I worked together on a different project called Ranch Boot Camp, where we put together this kind of intense training of on the ranch tasks, tightening fences, how to be correct with rancher etiquette when you're in a branding corral, how to actually um, do different functions that you might be doing during a branding. And one of the feedbacks that we had gotten from the first round was that they wanted some more downtime. They were getting pushed, and it was sort of a discussion amongst us as the people putting it together. How much do we give on that, and how much do we push to show that you really don't get a lot of downtime sometimes when you're doing these sorts of days in agriculture, which is, I mean, we talk about the romanticism of being a rancher, being in this industry, and that's something that people really need to look at with open eyes. That it is a very challenging industry to be in if you know that you are somebody susceptible to burnout. It's probably not if it's going to be there; it's when it's going to be there, how you communicate it, and how you handle it. So, JD, that brings me to the question of once you start seeing that burnout in an employee, is it the point of no return? Or what are the strategies for bringing that person back and getting them kind of better set and into a better frame of mind?
Well, I think the first thing is trying to have some really in-depth discussions with that person, taking time to understand where they're coming from, where they're struggling, is it, I mean, because I've seen guys that it was just they struggled with prioritizing their time, right? It was just something as simple as that. And boy, that's something that, right, I can help coach those guys through that type of stuff with my experience because I've been there. I mean, it's like, that's one deal I do have I guess it's a blessing in a way is I've done their jobs, right? I've been in their shoes. It looked a little different, I'm sure, standing in my shoes than it does in theirs, but I think I can kind of help guide those folks through some of those things. But you're just trying to understand, is it some place where I can intercede and I can help maybe give you some tools and help coach you on some strategies that might help take away some of your angst and just understand, especially if you're new with the company, that boy, this is just a season and it changes, because like say, this is a busy place, and we go from one busy to the next busy, but you know, like if you're going through a tough time, it doesn't always last forever, right? Sometimes when you get your head down in the weeds, it feels like, gosh, this is never going to change. And, you know, we're 3 weeks away from this kind of not really being an issue for you. And there's going to be something else, um, but I think part of it is you're trying to coach people into being adaptable, and, uh, if you're gonna be successful in life, you're gonna have to learn to take a little bit of stress. I mean, let's be honest, if every time the road gets tough, you pick up and move and you take your family on another wild ride around the West, um, you know, if it's something related to you personally, you've got to remember that just because I changed locations, I still took that guy with me, right? And I still all his issues and all those unresolved things that weren't dealt with, those go with you. And so you really have to take some time, I think, as an employee when you're feeling that, to be a little bit introspective and say, man, is there some place in my personal development and growth that I need to focus on, work on to be able to deal with some of this stress so that I can feel like I'm going to be more successful because, like Carolyn's situation isn't that unique, that you take these jobs and you kind of maybe feel like you plateau out or it's not meeting expectations. So you move on and you try a different role someplace else, and I think we're all looking for that perfect spot where we're going to be a right fit and it's going to fit us. But I see so many young families that, are following their husband's cowboy dream and getting yarded around the West from place to place. And I just think my goodness, sometimes you have to decide to take a stand someplace and grow where you're at and get comfortable with some adversity and some things like that to ever get ahead in your career and maybe earn a little more money and have a little more autonomy, i.e. maybe creates a little more space for your family, that that just moving on to the next place, hoping it's going to be better. That's not always gonna fix that if there's something in you personally that maybe is kind of holding you back. So I don't know. It's a interesting one. I think everybody's dealing with a different set of circumstances that way.
JD, that brings to mind too. There is an author, I can't remember his name. I just read a book by him, and he talked about how we've done a tremendous disservice to our younger generations by telling them to follow their passions for their career. And by saying things like, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, which insinuates that you're not going to hit those periods where you really have to put your head down and you just have to push through. And if you meet adversity, then maybe this isn't the place for you. And so it's more about, how do I build marketable skills, and how do I understand, again, kind of what are my negotiables and what are my non-negotiables that I know has gone too far that I can't put up with, and then being able to market yourself into those kind of positions that really work for who you are. But it goes back to what you were talking about that personal maturity of understanding, is this something that is external that it truly is, I can't deal with, or is it just something that I need to kind of grow through myself? And that's probably different for everybody.
Talking about what Rachel brought up about, like, as a family, maybe talking about these are the things that are non-negotiable before I go to that job interview and have that conversation. Because really a job interview is a two-way street. You're interviewing the employer as much as they're interviewing you, and you're trying to understand what their expectations are, and you need to make clear what your expectations are too, right? Because those have got to mesh if it's going to work long term. And so I think that it takes a lot of maturity to sit down with your spouse or your significant other, and just know where these are those lines that we can't cross. You know, like, do I have to have every Sunday off to go to church? That's one that you know comes up at different times, and it's like, gosh, that's a tough one, right? Because if you've got one guy that he's always saying, well, I've got to have Sunday off all the time. Well, so everybody else in the crew, they have to work Sunday because that's his non-negotiable. So you've got to figure out, like, for you, is that something is that a reasonable expectation that I have of the workplace and what they can provide? Um, is my thing that I want to be able to take my kids to work with me, and some places that can accommodate that, and that can be a huge part of it. There are other places and situations where that's not right or appropriate, and so it's like, say, you got to have all those conversations up front, because I find that sometimes, uh, when there are misunderstandings, it's probably because, uh, we both missed some of those nuances when we were having that first conversation. Because I really feel like once we start down that road, and you know, uh, I offer somebody a job, and they agree to take it. I mean, we try to be pretty clear about expectations, but you know, at that point, we do have to hold each other accountable for those promises that were made in the middle of that conversation, and just being real about that.
And I think we sometimes forget too that as individuals, our families, that our non-negotiables can change at different points of our life.
For sure.
And I have had to come to terms with that myself in the past couple of years, and what was important to me. And I've seen friends do it as well. And sometimes when you have kids, or when your kids are in the school system and you've built a community, you have a church, whatever it is, you realize that moving around is not negotiable anymore. And sometimes the job changes instead. And I think that is something that we could do a whole other podcast episode about, is the identity of how we sit in this industry. But I remember when I left my last like true ranch job, I remember thinking, can I still call myself a rancher even though I'm not directly managing cows anymore? I'm helping other people manage cows. And that was like it sounds simple, but it was a big question, because we all carry a lot of identity about what we do and how we do it in this industry. So.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's unique about our industry, is how much our identity's tied to our role, right? So much different than other industries, like that. You know, that that rancher, that cowboy identity, you know, that a lot of us carry into that. And then as our lives change, like say as your family circumstances change, your personal goals change, and then, you know, sometimes that comes into conflict with that identity, you know, and uh, sometimes your identity, you have to get comfortable with the fact that my identity has to shift a little bit because I'm at a different time of my life. I'm in a different role, you know. Boy, there were some of those things that, because I think about myself, there are some of those things that, you know, 16 years ago when I came to work here, I'd have hated the job I have now. You know, that guy would have thought, man, that is the lamest job ever. Why in the world would I want to do that? You know, and I look back now and I look at the job I had when I started and I'm thinking, you know, yeah, I could do that, but you know, I kind of grew past that, and you know, I don't care if I don't get to go out and brand calves. That sounds terrible, right? I mean, all those lifestyle things that everybody thinks there's, like, gosh, that's the reason why I do this is because of those fun days in May and June when we get to go out and do all those awesome cowboy things that everybody talks about and makes Instagram posts about and everything. And you know, your identity changes over time, and so I think, so, you know, it's okay for your expectations from your, you know, what you get out of your employment to change over time. I think that's okay too. So.
One more thing, Haylie, circling way back to something that JD said about communicating workload and whatnot with your employees. I think something from the employer side, or in my case, from maybe a consultant, although I don't like calling myself that, is like systems and systems thinking. And I think oftentimes when you're stuck in the system, you don't see how it could be made better. And so sometimes bringing a fresh set of eyes in is really helpful, because someone may say, hey, there's a way easier way to do this. Have you ever thought about XYZ? And it can completely change the way you're looking at a problem or a circumstance. And I found too that a really cool thing about working with other people is that sometimes what's really hard for one person is really easy for another. And so being able to communicate about it's not always the case. Sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. But sometimes if you're in an office with a couple other people, someone's really good at Excel and someone's really good at graphic design, and you can kind of help each other out there. So
Caroline, knowing your role and knowing that you are a numbers person, I want to talk to you a little bit about the efficiency and the, you know, this paradox of efficiency and burnout. So you have, once you get to the burnout stage, it's increased fatigue, more mistakes. That means that you have more cost now that goes into reworking things. If morale has been reduced, that can mean higher turnover. And then that goes into more training expense, more training hours, like what we've covered so much more so on this podcast. And then kind of worst case scenario, you can have people that end up getting injured, and then you've got downtime, you've got liability concerns. So these are all just actual tangible dollar efficiencies that are linked to something as emotional and soft and as touchy-feely as burnout. So how do you navigate that with the folks that you work with?
I treat them like a person first and have the conversation about what are your circumstances, what are your family. I work with a lot of family and smaller operations right now. That's just in the spot I am in my career. And so figuring out what their goals are and what their expectations are first, and then working our way up to the dollars, because that's why they hired me, right? They hired to figure out what's working, what's not, what can we make better. Um, but I think it's always sobering for people to see. My favorite one is the true cost of an employee on your ranch. Everyone thinks it's the salary. It's not just that. It's the beef and the horse hay and the fuel for your truck and the, you know, whatever else is going on, workers' comp insurance, healthcare, you know, all those things. And it's the same thing about bringing kind of the humanness to burnout, right? What are the ways in which we are losing efficiency, or what are the ways there are more costs showing up on our profit and loss statement because of how hard we're working? And once we can kind of see those, then we're in a little bit better of a spot to have the conversation about how can we change it? What is a lot of work and maybe not creating the return? What has a really good return that we can focus on and consolidate our labor force to do maybe 3 things instead of 6 things? Um, but it's a hard jump to make, especially um, what JD said about building relationships with people. I think you'll hear it from almost anyone in agriculture that people skills are one of the most important things. And in recognizing what people's motivation is, because that can help you to understand where they're coming from and help you help them.
JD, do you have any brainstorms of ways that we can cut costs? So thinking efficiencies while also not putting too much more strain on the employee base that we have.
Yeah, I don't know about like any specific places where you're going to cut costs, but I do think you need to always be challenging your system to be as efficient as it can possibly be, right? Because the more efficient our systems are, you know, at the end of the day, they're more profitable, and hopefully that means that we can share that profit down with people. I always go back to like our profit motive shouldn't just be for our owners. It should be that if we're more profitable, hopefully that all trickles downhill too, and so we're either able to offer higher salaries or pay bonuses or things like that, but I think always evaluating your system and just making sure that you're doing things for a valid reason and not just because that's something you've always done. um, and if you're seeing people struggle with that sometimes, because I think sometimes when people start to get frustrated and struggle, sometimes it's because maybe we haven't done a good job of coaching them in or helping them understand how what they're doing plays into our great big system and plays into our profitability. Because I do think that a lot of times when you see people struggling, sometimes it's just maybe they didn't understand their role and how what they're doing right now really contributes to the success of your company, you know? Because people want to be involved in something bigger than themselves. I think for most of us, if it was just about money, we wouldn't be in ag, right? I mean, there are a lot of situations where we could go and we could we could work fewer hours and make more money. So there's something unique about this that probably has attracted most of us to this. But you've got to help people understand why all those things that they're doing, why they matter. Because I think when people can understand or see a little bit more of that big picture and how even really simple things play into the success of the operation, it's a little easier for people to get past those hard days and understand that this is just a season, right? And we're just going to help our team get over the hump, because I think that's one thing is you know go back to, at the end of the day, if I can find some efficiencies, if I can create more value, well then hopefully I'm going to have an opportunity to share that with the people that helped us do that. You know.
There's a really great project from the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management, one of the students quite a while ago, that asked both employees and employers what they thought the most, Rachel, you know this study, what the most important thing was for an employee to know, and what were their motivations. And all the employers said, time with family, money, vacation, ability to ride, whatever it was. And the number two thing for employees that they stated themselves was, how do I fit into the bigger picture? And it was really surprising. People were like, we didn't think that was something that motivated people. And you're totally right, JD. It is. People want to know how they fit in, how we're making this better, and how we're going to get to the end product. And if you can explain their day-to-day role in the larger picture, I think it helps so much.
Well, yeah, because none of us want to just be a cog in the wheel, right?
No, right?
And I think we all want to feel like if I showed up today, what I did mattered, like we got something accomplished, and it was working toward a goal, and hopefully our team feels like we were successful. I mean, I think everybody wants that, and so yeah, sometimes it's as simple as, probably from an employer standpoint, if we're seeing some of that, maybe sometimes we need to sit down and message that with folks. And like boys, I really appreciate what you did here, because this is how this played into us moving toward a successful outcome. I mean, it goes back to those soft skills with people. Sometimes a little thank you, even when it's just something that's mundane and the day-to-day part of somebody's job, goes a long way, in those tough spots.
Absolutely, because burnout, like even as a mom, as a teacher, anything, you can solve a lot of burnout with a thank you. in some of those situations, and some genuine appreciation, and just helping them feel seen and feel heard. That, yeah, I know you're struggling, man. I know I'm tired too. It's a tough time of year. This is, yeah, golly, this is going longer than we thought it would, but we're all going to get through it, and there's going to be light at the end of this tunnel.
So communication is what I've heard throughout this last 45 minutes, is that if we can all just learn to be better communicators about what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and learn how to talk about that with everybody, that's key. So I think as a communications major, that's something I can honor, because I only got this degree because they told me it was a very employable degree. And you all are just, singing to that cause. So, Rachel, do you have any last questions or final thoughts for JD and Caroline? And I appreciate you so much bringing them to the podcast today.
I do. And I got to shift gears just a little bit, because my seniors just went to National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the trade show. It is filled with all of the technology that is going into the cattle business right now. And some of that technology is actually being touted as replacing employees. And so you've got this whole generation of young people that are looking at even the day-to-day movement of cattle and thinking, am I going to have a job in the future? Or is efficiency going to be pushing these ranches to adopt this technology on a large enough scale that they're going to have, less need for employees? I mean, that's another way that we're in an issue where we don't have enough people to fill in, especially these entry-level positions. And so talk to me a little bit about how technology, both of you, how you see technology playing into the future, how it's going to affect that line between efficiency and the need for employees. I don't think we can replace people completely. And so is it going to end up with our existing employees still having a little bit more to do than they do now? I don't know.
Yeah, I go back to do you really want to replace all your people? I hear all these people talk about like the collars and things like that on these cows, and they're like, gosh, I can replace an employee to do that, and this, that, and the other. And I do think there's some really cool applications for this technology. But I think it's a farce, and it's pretty unrealistic to think that we're ever going to take people out of the equation, because there are still a lot of tasks that go on these big ranches that just flat take people with skill, take people with a passion to show up every day. Things that you can't manufacture through AI or some tech gadget. I think we all think about this stuff too through a lens of our own time period. And this industry's been innovating for a long time, right? This is just the next big thing that's coming out. And so I think if I were a young person, looking at this as a field of endeavor, I think there's still a lot of huge opportunities over here, because I think at least for Western ranching, there's always going to be that mix of tradition and innovation. You know, I guess for me and for our company, I just hope we offer enough of that tradition that maybe that's the thing that hooks people for us, right? Is that we still provide more of that than some other places that have, gone to more mechanized ways of handling their cattle. And, like, I'd love to be able to tell where all my cows are at on my smartphone, but, I still, I want to have the people around that are good at what they do, so that when we need to do things, that I've got a top-notch team that can get things done.
I think that, as cliche as it sounds, technology is a tool just like any other tool, and that it's like a toy sometimes too. The new shiny things are really fun to play with, but from someone who sees the numbers first and some of the other stuff second, a lot of this is cost prohibitive and also not that efficient. And so I think it's really it's great for me to hear JD say we still want really skilled people who are willing to work and who are willing to be a part of our community ranch company traditions. And I think that's also another way that we can keep agriculture unique in a good way, which is keeping people both on their toes with new tools and also um, riding horses.
Yeah, I still go back to that's the one thing that I can sell about this place every day is the fact that you're going to get to make more horse tracks on a big place like this than you are anywhere else, right? And so that's my thing that I can make stand out, makes me unique, makes us appealing for a lot of people, because that's a component that we have to work with. Um, there's a lot of these technologies that I'll just be honest with you. Just going back to what Carolyn talked about the economics. If they really penciled, why is everybody that's implementing them right now doing it through grants? And I'm just going to leave that one right there. So,
Well, that's great, and I think I have told my students the same thing, but I think it's gonna be great to hear somebody in the industry, because they can go look at it two different ways. They can either be really excited about all the opportunities that technology could create for them, as far as being able to really intensely manage grazing or whatever else, but then there's also just a little bit of fear of, am I gonna have a place for this? Am I gonna be replaced? Is that the goal of a lot of ranches? Because they know that labor is such an expensive item on the costs, that the goal could be to replace the labor on the ranches. And my concern is always too, if we eliminate some of these entry level positions, there's already enough separation between society and agriculture and how their food is produced, that we're continuing to do that at a larger scale by trying to eliminate some of these entry level positions. So I think the students will be happy to realize that there's still definitely a need for them to be there, to have the skills, to bring that human component to agriculture that's so important.
Well, as we kind of close this discussion out today, I one of the things that's been sticking with me is the need to, whatever industry you're in, making sure that people are cross trained, so that if somebody is having a tough spot and needs to either completely leave for a few days, or maybe just realizes that they're pulling back a little bit, that somebody else can fill in that gap, and that is needed for the efficiency on the ranch. If your ranch is dependent on everybody being 100% every day, that's set up for failure already. And so that's one of the things I'm thinking of with efficiency and burnout, is just making sure that we've got folks that can kind of share that load for everyone. Any final thoughts and resources from you, Caroline, that you wanted to share with folks?
No, this has been great. It's been really enjoyable to talk to everyone. And I think, to piggyback off of what everyone has said, agriculture is changing, and also we're still here, and we're still working the land and working cattle and providing food for the entire nation and world. And that's a really cool thing to be a part of in whatever way you are, whether it's an operation manager, podcast manager, teacher, consultant. So yeah.
JD, any final thoughts from you?
I just go back to, like, it's a fine line. Everybody's skirting with all this is, trying to take care of yourself personally and take care of your job. And, I just go back to, like, one of the biggest things that you can do to avoid burnout is make sure and take all the personal time that you can get out of these jobs, right? Because the people I've seen burn out over time sometimes were the people, they were so vested in the job that they never would put it down. And so you've got to have some healthy release from these jobs. There's got to be some part of you that exists outside of work, right? Otherwise, you're not a very well-rounded person, and you're probably not going to last very long. And so you got to find a way to nurture that, and just be real about your expectations, because I think that's the big thing, is as long as you're being realistic about your expectations, what a job can provide, and then on the flip side, an employer is being realistic about their expectations of an employee, and i.e. not putting an unrealistic workload on folks, because at the end of the day, we all have the same amount of daylight to work with every day, right? And so, just being thoughtful about people and making sure that when you do have slow times, that you're throwing some time at people, because you can buy a lot of grace with people just by throw them in an afternoon here and there when it's slow. It doesn't have to be dark to dark 7 day a week mentality here in ag. So I think when I hear people talk about that, I think that's a weak excuse on ag's part of what we expect out of people. That part of our jobs, managing these ranches, is to figure out a way how to honor that relationship between the person and the business.
Again, what a tremendous caliber of guests. Thank you to JD, to Caroline, and to Rachel, as always. Oftentimes after these recordings, we have a conversation after the conversation that yields something pretty important. And that is exactly what happened with this podcast. We started talking under JD's direction about cell phone usage. Now, this isn't your employee using a cell phone in ways that they shouldn't when they're on the clock or anything like that, but rather the fact that cell phones make us all so reachable, and that this can only exacerbate burnout at times. So the importance of making sure that you are only texting somebody within those qualified work hours, because nobody wants to have their phone pinging at 7, 8 o'clock at night. You're sitting down for dinner and now suddenly your mind is on work again. If it is not something that is critical in that moment, nothing's on fire, we don't have an emergency, figuring out what those hours of operation are and making sure everybody can honor those. That's coming from the employer, that's coming from the employee. Let people have time to step away. And by all means, technology nowadays, you can do a scheduled send, put that to something the next day if it's something that you think you're going to forget, but isn't mission critical. So I thought that was a great point to include. And with that, thanks for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, do all of the things to show your support. We really appreciate you being here on the Ranch Workforce Project.